Welcome back. Today we're going to continue talking about signals and we're going to get into the details of an action potential. So a little background information before we get started. There's different types of ion channels in the cell membrane of a neuron. There are leak channels, which are always open, and so ions just diffuse down their concentration gradient. We talked about how the concentration of potassium is higher inside the neuron, so like it naturally flows out, whereas the concentration of sodium is higher outside of the neuron, so it naturally flows in. These other three types of ion channels are gated, which basically means they can be turned on and off in response to something. What turns them on is different, though. Ligand gated are also known as chemically gated ion channels because a neurotransmitter has to bind, like acetylcholine. And then once the neurotransmitter binds, then the channel will open or close, depending on how the neurotransmitter affects it. Mechanically gated open in response to mechanical pressure. So this would be like if you touch your arm, you can feel it because you're literally putting pressure on your sensory receptors. And then voltage gated are going to open in response to a change in electricity. And we can see that the electricity causes a shape change in the protein that lets it go from the open to the closed state. So just tuck that away. And then, especially today, we're going to see some channels that are always open. And then we're going to see some channels that open in response to a voltage change. As a quick review of membrane potential. So these would be our ion channels that are always open. Potassium is always flowing out. Potassium's positive, so when it leaves, it makes the inside negative. That's where we get that -70 from. Potassium is higher outside of the cell, so it's always flowing in. And then we have the pump that's going to maintain the concentration gradient. The pump pumps out 3 sodium ions and pumps 2 potassium back in. So resting state is at -70. So this is now adding voltage-gated channels to that same picture as before. So like this is still our neuron. You could imagine like right here are like the open channels for sodium and potassium, and here's the sodium and potassium pump, and here's a section of the neuron we haven't seen before, the voltage-gated channels. So there are sodium channels and potassium channels that will open if the voltage changes. However, at -70, all of them are closed. So when the cell is resting, the voltage-gated channels are closed. The next thing that's going to happen is the sodium channels are going to open. And when the sodium channels open, it causes the sodium to go into the cell because it's going down its concentration gradient. Let's think about how that would change our charge. It was -70, but then positive things are coming in. It's going to become less negative. So the word for that is depolarize. Polarized means it has a charge of -70. Depolarized means it's becoming less negative. So like we could be going up to -50, -30, -20. Those are all less negative than -70. This graph is showing that. So right here was the -70, and then when the sodium comes in, the charge goes up, becomes less negative. Next, the sodium gated channels are going to close and the potassium gated channel opens up, allowing potassium to be able to leave. As potassium leaves, it's a positive thing leaving, so the inside becomes negative once again. We call this repolarizing because it's going back to being negative. So it was really positive up here, and then now we're getting back down. And then there's normally like a little bit of lag between the sodium channels between the potassium channels shutting off. So a lot of times too much potassium will leave, which hyperpolarizes the cell. So it makes it like extra negative. So this could be as negative as like -90, or it's like below -70. But then eventually, we should get back to the resting state. So here's all of that in one picture. So resting state, we have a charge of -70. And then depolarization is when the sodium ions come in and it makes the cell positive. Repolarization is when the potassium-gated channels open, so potassium leaves, which makes it more negative again. Hyperpolarization occurs because the potassium keeps leaving, and then everything gets evened out back to -70, so we're ready to go again. And here is a close-up of the graph, so you can actually see some of the numbers. So the depolarization right here, when it becomes positive, that is the actual action potential. So like for a cell, becoming positive is like saying, hey, or like calling you on the phone. It's like how you send a message just by changing the electrical charge. Notice there is a threshold here. So if the membrane were to depolarize to like -60, nothing would happen. It has to meet the threshold that's around -55, and then it will be able to send the signal. If it just is like a little blurb like that, no action potential. And here's a video. So please send me all your questions.